Your live, interactive, your voice, your future coverage will begin shortly. Your voice, your future coverage with CBS 13 News starts right now.
And good afternoon and happy Tuesday, everybody. It's a little after 4 o'clock here on a Tuesday afternoon in Maine where it is hot and steamy outside, and the politics starting to turn up here in Maine as well, as it turns out. Thank you for joining us for our live interactive discussion here on President Biden's visit. We've just gotten some breaking news earlier today about where he plans to visit on Friday, his first visit to Maine as president. I'm pleased to be joined right now by Ron Schmidt. He's a professor of political science at the University of Southern Maine. Ron, great to see you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
We also have Mike Shepard, of course, our longtime partner at the Bangor Daily News. He's joining us in this conversation. Mike, great to see you again as well.
Hey, great to be here, Greg, as always.
Hey, Ron, let's start with you. And let me, for context, let's throw this up on our, obviously the news is breaking this afternoon. President Biden, Mayor Levesque from Auburn is our source that he's going to be visiting Auburn. The official word has not come from the White House of what he plans to visit, where he plans to go, what he plans to talk about. But our understanding is he's going to be talking about the economy. And he's going to visit Auburn. Ron, what are you understanding and what are you hearing about this visit? And what do you think about the visit?
I mean, it makes sense. The campaign is beginning to move into a more active phase. The last time that Joe Biden was in Maine, he was on a book tour and was sort of trying to introduce himself to Americans all over the place and talking about his story and his vision for the country. And now, in a sense, he's up to the same kind of activity. What he's doing is talking about his take on the economy, on what his first term has meant for the American economy. And he's trying to reach out to people to argue that his administration so far has been a success. I think.
Yeah, and again, this is it's important. He's been embracing this Bidenomics term, trying to sort of make it his own. And before we go any deeper and join Mike in the conversation here, obviously, anyone who's watching us right now, we welcome your conversation. We welcome your feedback, your questions. Already, we're getting sort of some representation here. Troy saying, "Go Biden." He's excited that he's visiting, and we already have a person, Todd, saying, "Yeah, no, tell him to we're closed. Don't come." So again, keep it clean, folks. Have a take. Obviously, this is an issue everyone has strong opinions about, and you should. But please keep it clean, keep it respectful of your fellow, Mainers who are commenting. But we'd love to hear any questions you may have as we talk for the next 20 minutes or so. Let me send it over to you right now, Mike. You've been writing about his visit actually for a couple of days now.
Yeah, I think the politics of it are interesting, right? Very often, right, people come into, presidents come to either Portland or Bangor, where the big airports are, and they don't get too far away. Here, he'll probably, given past precedent, come from fly Air Force One into Portland and maybe get helicoptered up to Auburn. We don't know exactly where he's going yet. Have some suspicions about manufacturing facilities there. But I think that, as Ron alluded to, you can't really separate this from the presidential politics at play. The second district of Maine, maybe depending, we don't know if Donald Trump's going to be the Republican nominee. Right now, he looks like a pretty safe bet to be. But he's won the second district twice already. He'll be looking to do it a third. Auburn is kind of a swing city in the middle of that, maybe a little, maybe a little more so than Lewiston. So it's a natural place for him to go dip into the second district and get away from kind of the Portland bubble, right?
And I was sharing the Bangor Daily News website, and I forgot to log in. We are subscribers, so I hit your paywall there, Mike. But anyway, yeah, obviously extensive coverage from the Bangor Daily News and at WGME.com. As we talk about this, again, it's interesting to note that President Biden has never actually come to Maine as president. And in fact, he didn't actually visit Maine as a candidate either. Right. We'll share some video right here. This was actually January of 2018. So he declared his candidacy shortly after this, a few months later. But he was promoting his book there. He's on stage at Merrill Auditorium promoting his book with George Mitchell there, as we see in the video. Interesting that he's never been here as president, Ron.
It is. And it reflects, I think, part of the mission that he's probably concentrating on right now, which is Biden is an incumbent president. And although the economy has issues, the latest data we're getting is the kind of data that previous incumbents could have run on easily. But there's this feeling of a disconnect of people not having a sense that the economy is on the mend or that it's doing that well. And that's a communication issue that the Biden administration has to deal with. So it makes sense for him to come to places like Maine, where, as you said, there's a whole area of the state that has voted for Donald Trump now in 2 presidential elections. But even in other areas where the Democratic vote is pretty solid, where he's not necessarily a super popular political figure. If in order to win next year, Joe Biden has to do more than just be able to point to a record. He needs to be able to summon enthusiasm. And this sort of tour, I think, is an attempt to begin to build that mood.
And it seems like, and Mike, feel free to jump in here too. Yeah. It seems like any one visit like this, let's be honest, unlikely to move the needle. Sure. But the messaging seems like it is important. He needs to do this to get out in front of, because again, the polls are very clear that his handling of the economy is not popular right now. Mm-hmm. And his overall popularity is underwater right now. Mm-hmm. He needs to get out in front of this. Whether or not, again, a visit like this to Auburn on Friday is going to move the needle, it's very unlikely, but he's got to get out in front of this, it seems.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Ron. Sorry.
It probably won't move the needle, and it's for a presidential election. It's early, but all of this stuff has to do with taking one step after another and building a presence and building networks of volunteers, and you really can't start that kind of work too early.
Yeah, that's a good point. Mike, what were you going to say?
Oh, and I was just going to say that I think the historical parallels here, or maybe the lack of historic precedent, is really interesting, right? They're getting some good economic numbers, and yet people are still feeling the cost pressures that we've had going on here, and as well as his approval ratings are stuck down in the low 40s. We had a poll of Maine in April, I believe, that had him at 47% in Maine, a state that he won by 9 points. So he's not doing well politically, period. His only saving grace may be that he may be running against Donald Trump, who has lower favorability ratings than he does. But make no mistake, the president is not doing well politically, and if he's going to win, and even the polls right now say it would be a fight between him and Trump. It's going to be difficult, and these are the kinds of places where he has to make gains between now and the end of 2024.
And as you mentioned it, I mean, the last president to visit Maine was, of course, Donald Trump when he visited that surprise. This is video of that visit actually in October of 2020 when he visited Levant, the Bangor area, went to that sort of surprise visit where he went to the apple orchard there. Again, Donald Trump won the 2nd district in 2020. He won it in 2016. But he's failed to win the state as a whole, though. Do you think this is but it's important to note Donald Trump did pay attention, quite a bit of attention to Maine in 2020.
Yeah,
it didn't necessarily help him a ton.
Well, he was here 5 times, and I think that it at least underscored the fact that he was watching here, and I think the issues that he was running on at the time in 2016, trade, where he staked out almost like a classically left position, right, compared with Hillary Clinton. Some of the issues he ran on kind of hewed to Maine. So you can't, I don't know what the chicken or the egg was there, but he was clearly paying attention to Maine, and he got an electoral vote, which is more than any president since the 80s has. A Republican presidential candidate has gotten out of Maine since the 80s. So in that sense, it's something.
Yeah, and again, he did visit actually, and here's video of it as well. In June of that same year, here's video of him visiting the Guilford plant up there where they were manufacturing some of the COVID response materials. So he was in Portland. He heard during that June visit. He was in the Bangor area in that October visit. So the President Trump actually, as we said, paid a lot of attention to Maine. In general, though, guys, do you really feel like these are things that that candidates need to do? And it seems like Maine historically has sort of gotten some of the, I almost hesitate to say this way, but sloppy seconds when people are visiting New Hampshire necessarily, the first in the nation primary state, at least for now, at least with the Republicans, it still is. Maine has been historically gotten some of that spillover. But I think that the average voter sort of likes the idea that the president's paying attention to us at the very least. Ron, why don't you take that one?
I grew up in Southern California where all politics is retail and mass media. And I was amazed when I got to Maine at how much attention citizens expect from candidates and from elected officials. It's awesome. It's also relatively unique. Iowa and New Hampshire are used to that kind of treatment because of their role as you pointed out, Greg, in the election system. Most states are not. And I think that, yeah, President Biden would do well to pay probably more attention to that. That it's a hard task for presidents to try to stay on message and to talk about what they want, while also not giving people the impression that they don't care about what you care about or what you want to talk about. So he's definitely here to spread this economic message, but he does also really need to communicate that he hears what voters want, that he is attentive to their needs, and that he can talk to people in Maine. I mean, a Democrat like Jared Golden obviously knows the people of his district, and I think there are lessons there for the president.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. Mike, how about your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would just encourage people to think about this, and sort of the national take on this is that, there will be Maine is sort of a backdrop for a speech about manufacturing or the economy, and in this era of mass media where politicians kind of talk to different people using their own media channels and different partisan ones. You see this will be received nationally as, okay, the president is going to a rural manufacturing heavy state, with a manufacturing history, and talking about these issues. So it's going to be seen as a backdrop, and I think that's where the White House advance team is kind of going with this.
Do you think those who are sort of reacting to this, though, obviously President Biden wants to talk about the economy. He wants to reframe the economy as being, hey, plentiful jobs, soft landing. It appears likely anyway when it comes to the inflation, even as people are obviously still feeling the pain of inflation. But he wants to get the message out there that the economy overall, you should feel good about it, even though many people don't. At the same time, it feels like a lot of his critics may point to Maine and say, well, look, there's a lot of issues when it comes to the border crisis. Even in a state like Maine, that's a long ways away. We've got a lot of asylum seekers. We obviously have a lot of homelessness crisis, the drug crisis. All these things hit home here in Maine as well. Do you guys see that being sort of a subtext, or at least his political opponents trying to make it a subtext? Ryan, why don't you take that?
I'm interested in seeing how he's going to interact with people on Friday. Joe Biden has really sort of offered a promise as a candidate and as a president to be more of a somewhat old-fashioned style politician, somebody who listens to the people's opinions, who can participate in debates and not get the rhetoric too angry or too ramped up. And in order to really deliver on that style of governance, he needs to be able to show that if he comes to a place like Maine, yes, we know what optics his campaign is looking for, and we know he wants to talk about his economic plan, and that totally makes sense. But he needs to also show that he can adapt to various parts of the country. That if he shows up somewhere and he wants to talk about, the soft landing from inflation, but people really want to talk about the problems that they perceive, and for like Liz's point on the chat, the asylum seeker issue in Portland, he needs to be able to show that he can tack to that and respond to it. That he's not just here to sell a bill of goods, which again, I mean, we get that, but that he's also capable of hearing what the people of Maine care about.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see if he does bring up it. I mean, we're not clear of the format. We're not sure if he's going to be taking any questions. We're not sure even where he's going to be, other than we're hearing it's going to be Auburn. But Mike, what do you think about that? You think there's going to be some conversation around anything other than Bidenomics, or do you think he really wants to control it and keep it to the economy on Friday?
Well, yeah, these events are always so controlled, and I don't expect that we're going to get our whacks at the president when it comes to questions and things like that. Obviously we're going to try, as will the traveling press pool that's always with him. But I think on the asylum seeker issue, I don't expect him to bring that up, but I certainly expect the Republicans to bring that up. And one interesting note on Auburn is that it has a Republican mayor in Jason Levesque, who is a former congressional candidate and a pretty active, political figure. And the city under his leadership has gotten a lot of recognition across the country for loosening housing policies in recent years and really building a lot of it. In contrast to some other places in Maine. So there could be an interesting sort of side note in this whole thing. It could be sort of a classic Biden image, right? Calling out a Republican mayor for doing something that he sees as good. I think that Auburn would be a really right place for that kind of a message. So Auburn just becomes kind of a more interesting backdrop, given that.
And given
Point.
Go ahead, Ron. Given that what you just mentioned, actually, it spurs a thought here. We're anticipating, while we don't know this, I think it's fair to assume that Governor Mills will probably be on stage with him. It'll be interesting to see. You mentioned Jared Golden a moment ago, Mike. I'll be curious to see if Jared Golden's on stage or anywhere near this event. My guess would be no, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, I believe the House has votes scheduled that day, and of course, there are political considerations for him as well. He's as probably well established as he has been during his tenure after winning a third term relatively easily in a district that probably I think you could count on a couple of fingers, maybe the Democrats who could win that district these days. So he's in a pretty good political position. But he's never going to be off the national radar. He's always on it. And it'll be an interesting decision, particularly if the House schedule would allow him to be away from it and he decides not to go, for instance. But there's a fine line to walk there, and he could probably justify that either way.
Yeah, I would think so too, given the schedule. I mean, Fridays tend to be a transition day for Congress. A lot of times they're on the road heading back to their districts. But if they have vote schedules, obviously that's an easy duck for him if he didn't want to show for political reasons. And I don't want to cast aspersions or make any guesses here. I mean, I don't pretend to know. Although, again, given his politics, given where he's been, and sharply critical of President Biden on a number of issues in the past, it'd be surprising, I think, to see him participate in this event. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. Ron, any more thoughts on exactly what's going on? And again, appreciation to those who are joining us on a very steamy and sunny Tuesday afternoon here in Maine. By the way, if you're watching this right now live at 4:20-ish on a Tuesday afternoon, feel free to jump in the conversation. If you're watching this later, again, this is going to live on our website and our social media. You can continue to interact with it. It just won't be live later, but we, of course, invite you to participate in our coverage. We're going to be talking more about this visit at CBS 13 live at 5 coming up, and again at 6 o'clock. And we have a scroll there a moment ago on our screen mentioning, of course, more coverage at WGME.com and our partners at the BangorDailyNews.com. Interestingly, we've already sort of touched on this, Mike. The part of the website I was going to pull up from your website a moment ago from the BDN was that part where you were noting that the national picture, and that President Biden is coming to Maine in a unique moment where there's a lot of this sort of things that are rattling around the country that are weighing down his candidacy are very much front and center here in Maine as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that look, the presidential election is not going to hinge on Maine unless things are crazy and we're really watching that one electoral vote from the second district. But there are many places in Maine that look a lot like the places that he is going to have to win. I'm thinking about places. I'm drawing a line between places like Rumford and Jay and parts of the St. John Valley to Michigan or Pennsylvania, where those are really the areas where this election is going to be decided. And I think we do have a lot of little microcosms here of the political situation that he's facing. So I think Maine is important. Parts of Maine are certainly going to be at the center of this election, and we'll see. I think over the next year and a half, we'll see that push and pull.
Yeah, Ron, your thoughts on that too?
President Biden has a lot of audiences to be keeping in mind, and some of them are people like the folks who support Jared Golden despite partisan differences, and part of that audience are people who look like Pennsylvania voters or Ohio voters, exactly, and part of them look like the voters in the first district who are Democrats who just maybe aren't that excited about him. So I think in a lot of ways, Maine poses interesting problems and an opportunity for him early on to work on getting this messaging right.
Yeah, I think you make a great point. I mean, elections, we talk about elections being won and lost by swing voters and that sort of thing. But if President Biden, if we're seeing this sort of depressed support amongst his base, whether it be amongst, pro-labor folks in the Rust Belts like Michigan or Pennsylvania, or the African-American vote in other parts of the country, where some polls are suggesting softening of support in that base, critical. That's as much as important as those swing votes. Is your base excited about you as a candidate? And there's a lot, I think, of cracks in that right now for President Biden, whereas Donald Trump seems to have the opposite problem. There's no cracks in his base. The problem for him seems to be getting the middle to come back to him because of its legal troubles, everything else that's going on because of January 6th, what we all observed there that day. So he has sort of the exact opposite problem of Joe Biden. And if it is, in fact, a rematch between those two, it'll be interesting to see which of those issues, becomes more prevalent for them. So again, we are a long ways out from this election, but these are the conversations we're starting to think about right now.
Mm-hmm. The heck of a time to be a political scientist.
I was going to say, you're probably incorporating some of this into your classwork too. And I appreciate it. Hey, with the moments we have left, I do want to mention it again. We really appreciate those who jumped on and participated in our live stream here. We realize it's a bright and sunny, afternoon in the summertime. But we do have more coverage coming up on CBS 13 News live at 5. And I do want to encourage anyone who's watching this on social media, go ahead and follow some of the links you'll find over to the BangorDailyNews.com and WGME.com. We'll have more coverage of this. Closing thoughts, gentlemen? Anything else you wanted to get out there before we sort of wrap things up? And I got to get ready for the 5 o'clock news here. Ron, why don't you take it first?
I think I've had my say. I'm looking forward to Friday and to what comes next.
Mike, how about you? Any coverage you want to? You're going to be there, I believe, on Friday. I got to admit, I actually have a long scheduled vacation on Friday. For my parents are celebrating. I think, what are we up to? Their 63rd wedding anniversary. So I'm going to be there on Friday. Unfortunately, well, I'm proud to be there, but unfortunately, the timing for me. Mike, I assume you're going to be at the event on Friday.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I will be or someone else will be, but I definitely will be.
You'll be part of the coverage.
Running point on it, and no, I mean, I think it's going to be really interesting to see how let's see how scripted it is, what he talks about, and how Maine's situation kind of plays into this. He's talking about manufacturing gains, but I was looking at data today that Maine's manufacturing jobs actually kept kind of stalled out over the last year. So it's an interesting. It's an interesting backdrop, and we'll see if he's making national news or if his speech is really tailored to Maine. And it's always interesting to see how national figures, try to make that conversion. And it's our first chance to really see it from Joe Biden.
It is our first chance. Hasn't been here since about 3.5 years. All right, gentlemen. Ron Schmidt from the University of Southern Maine, Mike Shepard from our partners at the Bangor Daily News. Gentlemen, really appreciate you joining me for this breaking news, President Biden's visit coming up on Friday, some sort of context and previewing and all that sort of stuff. And again, more coverage coming up, CBS 13 News live at 5. And thank you to Travis and everyone else who's been participating in our conversations today. And we'll catch you back here later.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
This has been live, interactive, your voice, your future coverage from CBS 13 and Fox 23. Make sure to stay connected with CBS 13 and Fox 23 on air, online, and through these social channels. Thank you for watching.